I'm going to be talking to Ed Hirs, energy economist at the University of Houston, about all things energy in the United States. So, welcome to the interview, Ed.
Oh, Markham.
It's been a busy week. I don't even know where to start, but you know what? Let's talk about electricity. All I'm seeing in my inbox the last couple of weeks is stories about how American electricity prices are soaring through the roof. Why is that?
Well, for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, we have an old infrastructure, aging infrastructure. We've not been spending money on it. 10 years ago, the former co-chair of CAISO, Mason Welrich, wrote a book talking about modernizing America's electricity infrastructure. He estimated that we needed to spend $2 trillion just to get us back up to nominal operating levels. And then the U.S. electricity markets, there's not one grid, there's not one market per se. Each one's managed differently. In the southeastern United States, it's dominated by vertically integrated utilities that operate with the oversight of public service commissions, public utility commissions. That pretty much stays the course through the midsection of the nation, the Midwest. And then on the coast, we have RTOs, ISOs, so regional transmission organizations, independent system operators. And these markets are less regulated or regulated differently. They are severely regulated. Their idea was they would break off the wholesale part of the electricity market and optimize that day by day according to cost, and adopted this electricity only sort of compensation. And so while this may be a sore subject, if the Toronto Blue Jays were paid on an electricity only basis, only those players taking the field during the game would get paid. Those on the bench wouldn't get paid. Of course, for that 18 inning game, everybody got paid. And you can imagine through the course of the season, those players not being called out regularly will eventually drop out of the game. Well, that's how it was with U.S. generators. The high cost guys not getting called in would leave. And so we lost some nuclear power plants. We had a tremendous attrition with the coal-fired power plants. Well, now today we've kind of reached the limit of that. Coal-fired power plants average more than 70 years in age. They're getting on. They're long in the tooth. They're breaking down. Some of them are blowing up even. The natural gas fleet averages more than 30 years in age. They're breaking down. But the economics now at the margin are being driven by the renewables, the solar and the wind farms that come on and can undercut simply because they don't have a labor cost, they don't have a fuel cost. It really doesn't pay anybody to build new gas plants, new coal plants, and certainly no nukes, although where we're seeing the new demand from data centers, from businesses who are terrified because of the diminished reliability, petrochemicals in Texas, they're building new power plants behind the fence, behind the meter. This doesn't do anything to help stabilize pricing in the grids. And so we're seeing higher cost due to a diminished reliability, gaming on the system. Keep in mind that low cost electricity does not translate into low priced electricity.
Gotcha. Okay, so we got a bunch of problems. You've got an aging fleet of power generators. You've got an aging infrastructure. You've got rapidly rising demand. You've got all sorts of costs, like on the West Coast, related to wildfires and so on. It sounds like a real mess.
It is. The United States, we just haven't paid attention to infrastructure for the longest time. It's just not electricity infrastructure. Here in the city of Houston, about 20% of the fresh water supply of the city is wasted every day through broken pipes and leaks all across the city. Aging infrastructure that nobody's paid any attention to. Keep in mind, if you have a natural gas fed home, when was the last time you checked the pipe going to your meter? We discovered at our home that 54 years is just too long to go between inspections. With the drought, we had a gas leak in the backyard simply because the pipe had rotted away. Why would we go looking for trouble? It's that way across America. Sewage systems, water treatment facilities, the spillage into waterways, the roadways, the collapsing bridges. As a society, we don't like spending taxpayer dollars on maintaining infrastructure, although intrinsically and intuitively, we know we have to.
Okay, Ed. So that's one story in the negative. LNG exports in new supply coming into the market from the United States would seem to be a good news story. Would you agree?
Well, absolutely. And, the political pundits are saying, well, this is because the Trump administration has relieved the Biden administration's moratorium on permitting. That really has had nothing to do with this whatsoever. These plants that have been announced that have reached final investment decision, they're going ahead. What actually has delayed the announcements of these plants have been the Trump tariffs on steel and aluminum and other materials. I mean, those are unavoidable at this moment. And so it's driven up the capital cost for these export facilities that are being built. There's a tremendous expectation that this is going to, pardon me, flood the LNG market globally. I would not want to be the board of directors approving the last 4 or 5 export facilities. But the dynamics in this market are different. And if you give me a moment, let me walk through those. Qatar is expanding its export capacity dramatically, more than doubling. Their cost of natural gas is about 5 cents per MCF. Now, of course, in the Permian today, it was yesterday, it was minus 65 cents an MCF at Waha because, the producers had to pay somebody to take it off their hands. There's gas going into Mexico, going out to LNG. It's coming to the Texas Gulf Coast. That's going to be remedied in time. But the low-cost producer in the global market is Qatar. Easy access to the water. What has held up LNG adoption across the global market has been regasification facilities. That's a big capital expense. And then once you put that in place, access to a domestic distribution network, pipelines. In the US, we carried on with coal-fired power plants far longer than we should have, mainly because our misguided economic regulation of pipelines prevented the building of pipes and gave disincentives to building more pipes from, say, Texas to California or Texas to New England. And so power companies were never going to build gas plants where they couldn't get a reliable supply. Well, nobody in Europe, nobody in Asia is going to build infrastructure to operate on natural gas for power plants until they have a reliable supply. Now it appears they can get a reliable supply, not only from Algeria and Australia and Malaysia, but from Qatar and the United States. And so now we're seeing more receiving facilities. I expect to see demand growing at least at the pace of the supply, probably growing a lot faster than supply.
See, that's interesting, Ed, because there are analysts who would disagree with you, and I've interviewed a number of them. And so, for instance, I know this is not built and is not in construction, but the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline from Russia to China could cut out like 50, 60 billion cubic meters of gas imports a year for China. A number of other Asian countries have specific policies to end LNG imports because they don't like paying for it. Would prefer to burn domestic coal if they could. I'm an LNG skeptic. I think that given all of the new supply that's coming on board, that there just is not going to be enough room for new players after about 2028 because of that.
Well, I think there will be. And keep in mind the pipe that's going from Russia to China doesn't supply nearly enough for China's needs. China is not going to become dependent upon Russia for a critical marginal supply the way everybody saw the EU. Everyone in national security circles told Germany, told the EU, don't become dependent upon Russian gas supplies. And yet, was it Schroeder who went ahead and was on the board of Gazprom and clearly was bought off by the Russians? Angela Merkel has apologized to Germans and to the EU for her feckless leadership. There's plenty of natural gas out there, plenty of supply that's coming to market. China's not going to tear up and tear down any coal plants right away. Keep in mind the Germans kept all of their lignite coal-fired power plants, post unification. The path going forward, and I think we're seeing OPEC begin to adjust to this, is OPEC sees the LNG growth as an enterprise threat. And LNG can get out if the supply is large enough. It will undercut crude oil on the BTU equivalent basis, because there are some economies that use natural gas and gasified LNG in that way. 10 years ago, Pakistan and Brazil both had over 1 million natural gas-fired vehicles. The U.S. had fewer than 100,000, probably 20,000 in Oklahoma City due to Chesapeake being there and Aubrey's promotion of them. It's a clean fuel for those nations wanting to clean up the atmosphere. That's the way to go in an initial step until they get to renewables, or in China's case, this massive build out of nuclear power plants.
Ed, I'm going to bet you a lunch, and I'll fly down to Houston to eat at your expense when I win my bet that LNG is not going to be there won't be as much demand as you think there is. So let's agree today that we're going to we each take that bet, and we'll see how it turns out.
We're on. We now have a Michelin-starred barbecue place here, and we'll go there.
I look forward to it. I love Texas barbecue. Well, let's talk about the effectiveness of new sanctions on Russia's oil companies. What can you tell us about that?
May I laugh?
You may.
Sanctions are certainly going to be an impediment to the owners of these companies, the executive teams. It's not going to bother Russia whatsoever. I mean, as Putin himself said, yeah, this may hurt for a little while. It's not going to be that big of a deal. So what it will do, and I think what we've seen it do, is it's forced prices just a tiny bit lower in the global market. Saudi Arabia just a day or two ago dropped by $1 a barrel, a couple of bucks a barrel. It's priced to some of the Asian markets. Why is that? Well, the Russians are now having to discount their oil a little bit more to get it to those markets. It's done nothing to the shadow fleet. There's no way the U.S. and the EU can reach the executives of the Russian oil companies for any kind of prosecution. They live with Putin under the protection of the Russian government and Russian military. Year in, year out, people have argued about these economic sanctions and how we can kind of bottle them up. The only way to really do that is to do it physically and prevent that oil from getting to market. If we haven't blocked the ports, we haven't blown up the pipelines, torn up the wells, that oil is going to get to market. And in a sanctions environment, it's just going to drive down the price for everyone, simply because the Russians are now going to be the price leaders. We saw this in 2015 when the Obama administration relieved Iran of the oil price sanctions. A lot of the analysts said, "Oh my God, the price of oil is going to plummet because the Iranians will be adding all this new supply to the market." And they were quite surprised to find that the price of oil actually trended up about $1.50 a barrel, simply because Iran could go back and say, "Well, I don't have to sell it to you at a discount anymore. I'm going to sell it to you at full price, guys." And there we go.
Ed, why don't we close off the interview with one other story that's caught your attention?
Well, most recently, we've seen data from EIA. Some folks in the U.S. administration are still working, pointing out that the horizontal wells in the U.S. oil patch are declining faster and faster. The curves are steeper and steeper. And so we've always known that with a horizontal well playing out most of its production, 80, 90% of it in the first 3 years, that producers would have to maintain an ever accelerating pace of production or drilling to maintain production levels. And now with the physical characteristics of these wells playing out even faster, maybe 80% of lifetime production in the first 2 years as opposed to 3 years, for independents to maintain production, they're going to have to keep deploying rigs a little faster. Now we're seeing a tremendous growth in AI. More than 10 years ago, the oil field service companies were deploying AI through the drill bits. Rigs were actually talking to each other across a mile here, a mile there, finding the sweet spots within those particular horizontal layers. That's improving. Labor costs are down simply because some of the automation has removed one or two guys from a field crew. But that's got to continue. The U.S. is still the high-cost producer. If OPEC is really concerned about LNG making inroads into the oil market, into the energy market, it's not just OPEC fighting for market share against the shale patch in the U.S. It's OPEC fighting for market share on behalf of all oil producers and trying to delay the transition to LNG, forestall that if they can, forestall a nation saying, "Hey, we're going to shift to gas." In Guyana right now, there's a large power plant under development simply because of all the associated gas coming off of the huge find made by ExxonMobil offshore. Those transitions are going to continue. Strategically, Europe is still vulnerable to interruption of gas supplies. They're still bringing in some gas from Russia and some oil, and they have a direction to go low carbon. So I think that market's going to improve, but I think the steeper decline curves that we're seeing in the U.S. oil patch may lead to the U.S. LNG becoming less competitive over time as associated gas production goes down, and the LNG exporters on the Texas Gulf Coast and on the Mexican West Coast won't be getting gas that somebody's had to pay them to take off their hands.
Ed, a pleasure as always. We'll look forward to chatting with you next week. There's always new stuff to talk about. Thank you very much for this. Have a good weekend.
Thank you, Markham.